Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 345th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Claiming your inner urban farmer is easy. Grow food, share it, and name your farm. Then let the world know you're an urban farmer while supporting our podcast. Pick up your Urban Farmer bling, hats, and t-shirts at imanurbanfarmer.com. This Urban Farm podcast is brought to you by the 2018 Food Revolution Summit. I say food choices are our most important factor to staying healthy. The Food Revolution Summit helps us in this discovery process. It's free, online, and features 24 top food and health experts teaching us how to reduce the risk of the most notable diseases of our time. Visit urbanfarm.org/summit to sign up for this life-changing event. Today on our podcast, we have someone who inspires through film. We're talking with Antoinette Wilson about inspiring stories about living the change. Tasmania-born and New Zealand-bred, Antoinette began her professional career in book publishing and dreamt of managing the editorial offices of Random House, New York, by the age of 40. Instead, just before her 40th birthday, she took on the management of the harvest and labor at a CSA in rural New Zealand. She had begun studying toward a Permaculture Design Certificate and was committed to living a low-impact lifestyle. During a 2015 documentary project exploring simple living, she realized the extraordinary capacity of film to educate and teamed up with Jordan Osmond of Happen Films. The pair write, direct, and produce short films, and more recently their new feature film, Living the Change, inspiring stories for a sustainable future. The self-taught filmmakers live in a 20 square meter, hey folks, that is 215 square feet, unplumbed but luxurious room on the end of a shed in a friend's 3-acre food forest, and have a passion for sharing stories that educate and inspire about how we can all live beautifully on the earth. Welcome to the show today, Antoinette. Are you ready to rock the food forest?
Hi, Greg. Yeah, let's go foraging.
Sweet. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Sure. So I guess I was a young greenie right from the early days, and there's no good reason for that because I wasn't raised in a family that was particularly environmentally minded. There wasn't a lot of discussion around green politics or anything of that nature. But for some reason, that was my bent. And from an early age, in my mid-teens, began volunteering at the Environment and Peace Information Centre in my local town, and developed, quite a passion about saving the rainforests and the whales and the dolphins and so on. I look back now and think it was all quite a sort of a surface understanding of what the problems of the world are. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So a different sense of urgency, I think, around the problems that we face.
You think?
Yeah, I think we have much more sense of urgency around it now than we did then. But definitely, a growing understanding. But I look back on my understanding of what was going on, and I could feel that there was something wrong with the world, but I didn't really understand what it was, and I just knew that I wanted to be part of fixing the problem.
I actually just want to jump in here real quick. In 1974, I wrote a paper on how we were overfishing the oceans because I had a sense that there was something wrong with the way we were living on the planet.
Wow, at 14, that's a great thing to be writing about in any era.
Well, yeah, what I just heard you say is pretty much the same thing. You had that knowing for yourself. Tell me more about that.
I don't even understand it, to be honest. It was a really strong sense and, beyond just sort of the environmental, beyond wanting to save the forests and the dolphins, I felt that things were wrong, in me as well. Like, I feel like, we all talk about everything being interconnected.
Yeah.
I feel like the health of my body and the health of the planet are one and the same.
Yep.
This is what I feel now. What we do, the way that we treat the soil that we grow our plants in, it should be the same way that we treat the microbiome that we put, our food into.
Yeah.
So, that connection between my body and what was going on in the world existed, but I didn't really understand it. And it's really only in the last probably 5 or 6 years that I've begun to see how that connection actually does work.
Yeah.
Connection actually exists. It wasn't just a feeling.
Right.
Really interesting, but, just so vague for me back then. Not a solid understanding at all, just the sense that things were wrong.
Right.
I was really lucky. When I was 16, my folks gave me an extraordinary opportunity to be an exchange student overseas for a year. And I chose Brazil.
Wow.
It had a huge impact on me. And this was 1992. This was the year of the Rio Earth Summit, the first Earth Summit.
Uh-huh.
I desperately wanted to be there. I couldn't believe that I was in Brazil and at the same time that this event was happening. And there was a youth summit taking place, and I applied to be part of that and was accepted into that. I was able to spend a week in Rio during the youth summit with 60 students from around the world. We spent a few days thinking up ways that what our contribution to saving the world would be. And it had a big impact on me, interestingly, more than anything, because I could see in that space the politics that were playing out to a certain extent. I was 16, I didn't really get what was going on, but I did get a real sense of the eco thing being a political thing and not necessarily being that not everybody was as passionate as I was about the core issues. So the big thing that had a really huge impact on me was that Rio was cleaned up for that event. All the poor were shifted out of town, the streets were swept, the city was pretty much polished.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a completely different city. And that had a really big impact on me, because that notion of hiding the reality of what Rio was,
Right.
in order to present a conference to all of these people all over the world, a sort of a mirage, so that they wouldn't be offended by the reality. I mean, fundamentally, what are we all talking about? That had a really big impact on me, that they felt the need to do that when they were talking about something that was intrinsically apart.
Yeah.
I learned a huge amount during that year, because I was brought up in a white middle class family and environment, and I was living in quite the opposite. And so I had my first experience of racism. I had my first experience of serious poverty. So I saw a lot of things that year and experienced a lot of things that year that really probably changed the person that I was becoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fundamental sort of time in my life. But interestingly, when I came home, I went off to university and, studied towards my future career, which was in book publishing, and became quite distracted by that. Just kind of walked away from everything that I had experienced and learnt in that environmental space, and became very focused on my career. And so for the next sort of 10 or 15 years, my work in book publishing was my life. But I've always been somebody who follows her dreams, or I've never been very good at not getting what I want. One of the things that I happened to want in my 30s was to be a tango dancer, and that ended up taking me to Buenos Aires. Yeah, so I moved to Buenos Aires in Argentina, took my work with me, and had a wonderful 6 years living there and dancing, but became quite unwell. And that experience of becoming unwell and starting to explore what was going on in my body brought me back full circle. So that brought me back to thinking, okay, so, what's happening in my body? Why is it happening? Exploring that, because I'd never felt that conventional medicine. So I ended up going down any other path that I could find, really. And of course, inevitably when you do that, when you start exploring how food affects your body, then you start exploring where food comes from, and then you start exploring what affects the food, at its origin. And before I knew it, I couldn't live the life that I was living any longer.
Wow. I'm going to jump in here again. I have to tell you that our lives parallel a lot like that. I had 20 years in the middle of my life. I had gone away from farming and gardening, and I was in technology. And around 1999 or 2000, I took a look at my life, and it's like, you know what? This doesn't support who I am in the world. Who I am in the world is an educator on how to grow your food. And so I shifted back to what I was doing before this thing started, before my technology career started. So, wow.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I envy the generation that's coming through now and all of the knowledge that's available to them via the internet to really sort of understand what's going on in the world that I think we didn't have to a certain extent. But there's a lot of us who are coming back to this, in our 40s or whatever, and sort of rediscovering. And it's an amazing rediscovery. You can lament the fact that you sort of got distracted for 15 or so years, but it's such an incredible rediscovery.
Yeah. And here's a couple of things. First of all, what I know is that 20-year technology piece in the middle significantly informed who I am today and how I am. I'm able at the age of 57, I'm able to manage technology, and that's a gift for me. So there's so many gifts that happened during that 20-year period of, that I brought forward with me. And I can see that that's the case for you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the skills that I have as a book editor have absolutely fed the skills that I've been developing
Yeah.
working in film.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to do is I want to really acknowledge you for listening to what there is for you to be doing. That's really one of my points of this podcast, is to bring people to the show that are following their passion, they're listening, and they're doing probably what's not conventionally thought that they should be doing. And so I really want to acknowledge you for listening and moving that direction, because that's powerful.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I don't know what it is that makes one person different to another in this respect. I describe myself as being someone who can't put up with being unhappy or not being content with my lot. I will always strive to be content with my lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure what it is that drives that necessarily. I just think so many people, so many of my close, friends and my family who understand what I'm talking about in terms of the issues that we're facing, absolutely get it, but can't find a way, can't see it within themselves, or can't find a way to be able to make the kind of changes that
need to be made.
That need to be made, yeah. And I absolutely understand. I have no children. I have a flexible job that allows me to, work from home. There are so many things in my life that I consider myself privileged,
Right.
to have that enabled me to live the way that I live. I'm very aware of that. And so, when I look at family who, have kids and perhaps a single income, I know how hard it is to really take on board the issues that we're facing and the changes that need to be made.
Yeah.
I absolutely get that. I see people who can make the changes like I've been able to make, and a lot of people around me have been able to make, like you've been able to make, and a lot of your listeners,
Yep.
as template creators, as space creators.
Uh-huh.
So we're creating a space for people to walk into when things really hit the fan and change actually has to be made. There's no choice, and I do believe that's coming. And so I see myself as a space creator. I'm creating something that we're educating, but we're learning different ways of being, developing resources in order to be able to continue that education. When things are really difficult, whether it's climate change or whether it's economic issues, whatever, there are so many resources that we need to set in place for everybody to be able to walk into.
Yeah. All right. So we've been jumping around this idea of living on the planet and living more lightly. Let's talk about your movie, Living the Change, Inspiring Stories for a Sustainable Future. I got to watch about the first half of it before we got on today. So Tell us, how did it come to be?
Okay, so when I was, as you said in your introduction, when I was 40, I took over the management of a house in a community-supported agriculture market garden here in New Zealand, and that was life-changing for me. I was doing 2 hours a week of voluntary work and ended up doing 4 days a week of paid work, and absolutely just loving this complete lifestyle change of being away from the desk. It was a huge learning experience about food and soil and food industry. So while I was there, so this was super life-changing, and over the course of that time, I began thinking about other aspects of my life, like my community. And I started exploring the idea of living in community. I was sitting at my computer one day researching communities, and I received an email with a subject line, "Free rent in an eco-village for a year."
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, yes. And they were looking for experienced permaculturalists, and I wouldn't have considered myself an experienced permaculturalist. And so I thought, damn, I don't fit that criteria. And so I sent it on to a friend and thought, that's a shame. And then a few days later, I thought, no, damn it, that is so what I want to do.
Nice.
The brief description that they'd written about it, I just thought, this is me. This is where I want to be now. And so I spent a week writing an application. We were allowed to write a 1-page application, and sent that off, and I got a Skype interview, and I was accepted. And so we were 9 people from around Australia and New Zealand who were brought together to live for a year on a property in Victoria, Australia, in the southern state of Victoria. And it was a property that was being developed. So it had a tiny earthship on it. It had a little cob cabin, had a little earthbag house, and it had a conventional shed, which was a sort of going to be a communal space to begin with. So we were 9 strangers with very little brief and no hierarchy. And one of the 9 people was a filmmaker. And so the idea was to spend a year exploring voluntary simplicity, exploring what it would take to live with a one world footprint. So I think the current understanding is that it would take at least 3 worlds in order to continue living the way that Australia lives. I think it's something like 6 for the States.
Yeah, exactly.
So we were exploring what it would take to live with a one world footprint. And we would do this over the course of a year, and then we would sort of see where we were and what we wanted to do from there. But the idea was, the 1-year project was in order to make a documentary film about it. So the filmmaker living with us was Jordan Osmond, and he was a completely inexperienced filmmaker. It was his first film.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and we were all completely really inexperienced at living in community. Most of us had some Permaculture Design Certificate learning, or our lifestyles kind of revolved around that. We were all very passionate about it. We all came with an absolute passion for the idea that one person whose idea this was, his vision. We all really believed in it, loved it, and were enthusiastic about being part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we came with 9 very different perspectives about how to do that.
You think?
Oh, yeah. The story of that year is a whole other thing. That became a film that Jordan made, and that I ended up joining the writing team on towards the end of the year and helping to produce. And so that was A Simpler Way, Crisis is Opportunity was the film. And that's had just about 1 million views now on YouTube. And that went up for free on YouTube 2 years ago, and has just received such amazing feedback about it, and lots of criticism too, because, there were so many successes and failures over the course of that year in terms of achieving what we wanted to achieve.
Right.
But the really important thing that came out of that year for me was meeting Jordan and seeing through his eyes and through his work, and, that he's this completely inexperienced but born to make films young guy, an absolute passion for what he's doing. And I just could see immediately the way that film could
impact.
Yeah, the fact that we need new stories, and that film is an incredible way of impacting on people with new stories and new ideas, new concepts, and inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the course of that year, he and I went on a road trip up the eastern coast of Australia to film other communities, to get some insight into other communities. And we made some short films as a result of that. They got great feedback online, and we just thought, this is such an exciting thing to be doing. We're meeting extraordinary people. We're being inspired. We're creating films that are inspiring other people. We're just receiving incredible feedback online, and we could really see that in the permaculture space, or the permaculture eco space online, there's not a lot of really high quality film being made.
Right.
A lot of people are doing kind of backyard stuff, and this felt like a niche, and it felt like something that we were just in the best place to fill. And so we made a decision to come back to New Zealand, where I have spent most of my life, and travel around. I had connections here, and so travel around and meet people who were doing some really inspiring things to change their lives, and to make short stories about them. And so that's what we did, and we released short films as we were traveling. Mm-hmm. But we also met other people along the way about whom we couldn't necessarily make a short film, but who had really interesting things to say, and whose message we really wanted to share as well. And so we started thinking, wouldn't it be great to create a feature-length documentary out of this, and bring together those stories interspersed with the really interesting information and knowledge and these concepts and ideas that these other people we were meeting were coming up with. And so kind of belatedly, and it was sort of an interesting way that this film came about, but we ended up sitting down over the course of a couple of weeks and writing it, and Jordan started editing it, and it's nearly a film. We're launching it in 2.5 weeks. We haven't actually got the sound mix back from the sound mixer yet, because DHL have lost the hard drive.
Right.
It's nearly there. So that's been the process. It's a film that brings together some beautiful, inspiring stories about growing food, about alternative currencies, about composting, including human manure composting, which is something I'm particularly passionate about.
Yep.
About going rubbish free. So really just, exploring as broadly as possible, all of the things that are happening in one place, like, a little country like New Zealand. Yeah. And it was so inspiring. Everybody was just so inspiring.
These aren't stories about people talking about doing. These are stories about people that are actually living this lifestyle.
And living in lots of really different ways. So one of my favorite stories from this film is about a couple. He's a general practitioner doctor. He's a family doctor.
Wow.
She's an illustrator, and when we interviewed them, they had a 10-month-old baby, Nisa, and they were living in a little 20 square metre old shearer's cabin on some land, and the land is owned by someone else with whom they have a work rent arrangement. So they work in exchange for their rent. Mm-hmm. So Tom works for about 4 weeks a year as a doctor, and Sarah is an at-home mum, and they both work on the land. So they've been able to recreate their life completely. They've gone from having to pay off a mortgage and live in a house that was high maintenance.
Right.
They've made this choice to create a lifestyle that has a very small footprint and that feeds them not only, beautiful food from the land, but also just this much quieter, much more connected existence that they've now got.
Yeah.
And they were so inspiring to talk to and just to be around.
Yeah. Well, and it inspires us when we get to meet people like that. I know for me, it inspires me to want to be more aware.
This whole, 2 years of making this, or what ended up being making this film, but making the short films and then this feature-length documentary, we've learned so much and changed so much about our own lifestyle. This year I'm going full to rubbish-free, and that's been a really interesting thought process, in terms of what comes into my life and what I really need and what I can do without. And that's been as a result of the rubbish-free interview that we did with a couple here in New Zealand who have been through that process. So, it's just been so inspiring on every level.
Perfect. Like I said, I got to watch about half of it before, and this is the pre-cut that you guys sent me a link to. And one of the things that I appreciate about the movie is the first 20 minutes or so are explaining what the problems are. Things like our growth model and peak oil and green versus the oil revolution. One of the people that was speaking said nature has a bold diversity of resilience when we look to nature and plan with nature. So what was that experience? Let's talk the first 20 minutes of the movie. What was that experience like of discovering what actually are the problems?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the first thing I'll say is that we really tried very hard to keep the problem part of the film down to 20 minutes because you could go on a long time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we really wanted this to be a film that inspires hope in people. And so hence the majority of it is stories that are hopeful and inspiring. But that first 20 minutes, it had an absolutely huge impact on us. I think one of the most important things I learned from everything that we kind of researched and the interviews that we did over those 2 years was probably, that this idea that we deserve everything that we've got now, that we should have everything that we've got now, that we just have to find a green way of being able to have everything that we've got now. I saw an electric car the other day that had a license plate, 0 emissions. I'm not sure how they'd spelled that, but I can't remember how they did it, but it was something along the lines of saying, this is a 0 emissions car. Well, it's not. It took fossil fuels to make everything about that car. The car happens to run on electric energy, but everything else that's gone into it requires fossil fuels. Everything that's required to get a plane into the air, to get all of the things that we will not have with green energy, and all of the things that we think we should be able to have with green energy, but actually we can't. And that was really important for me to learn, because that changes, once you really take that on board, that changes everything about how you perceive what you feel you should be able to have and what this planet can actually sustain.
Yeah. That's a big, big reality shift for people when they get that. I know it was for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard because that techno-optimistic perspective that so many people have, it gives you so much hope. It's okay because the scientists are going to work this out.
Right.
If everybody had an electric car and everybody had windmills and everybody had solar panels, then everything would be all right.
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah, it's distressing to understand that actually that's not the case.
Yeah.
And that we need to go deeper with our change.
Yeah. So what was one of the favorite things for you about creating this movie?
Absolutely, without doubt, it was every single person we met. Every single person we met was inspiring and educated us. Yeah. On some level, every single one of them. It was really incredible. Every time I watch her interview, I cry at the end of it, and Jordan always laughs at me because because even after watching this film about 1 million times by the end of her interview, and her name is Helen Jew, and she's 80, and she's the most active person I've ever met. At 80, she's more active than anyone I know. And she is so passionate about what she's doing. Her big thing is local currencies. Economic situation. She's very, very educated on it, and this has been in the last probably 20 or so years of her life that this has been her great passion. But she's just so full of energy. But in that interview, she said, that she described sending a proposal to her local council about climate change being the most important thing that we should be dealing with. And the council actually came back to her and said, okay, but so what does that look like? And she was just so overwhelmed to have that response from them. And so she went to her local community group that she's part of and said, we've got an opportunity here, let's do something. And they did. And she said, that's what feeds me, that's what drives me, that I can give back to this community that's given me so much, where I've raised my children. And every time I hear it, I get tearful, because that's what we need. That's the kind of interaction with our community that we need.
Yeah.
She's doing so much.
Yeah. Well, amen to that. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the experience of living in community, actually, because although the project itself was successful and there were many, many things that were successful about that year, I was stunned to find how challenged I was by it. It felt like failure to me that I hadn't been as successful as I expected to be in relating to my fellow community members and thriving in the space that we'd created and being a useful and productive member. I really, I was so overwhelmed by the community challenges. I was stunned. I really thought I was going to be much better at it than I was. And I think that that's a really interesting experience to have had. It's a really, really important experience for me to have, because that is, I think, probably quite common. Anybody can kind of get together with a group of people and build houses and develop gardens and so on. Living in community and getting on with your fellow community members.
Oh, yeah.
That is such a huge challenge. And I came away from the year feeling that I hadn't succeeded in the way that I would like to. But I came away feeling, okay, well, I've learned something really important here.
And that is?
Well, I certainly learned much better communication skills. Yeah. But I also learned that I'm not someone who can share a kitchen space.
Oh, there you go.
So when I live in community, I'm going to need a self-contained space. Yeah. That's an important thing to know about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mostly sort of communication skills.
Right.
I think I would be a much better community member in a different situation. But it was an interesting thing to feel a failure at, because I went into it with so much kind of enthusiasm and expectation of that not being the hard bit.
So what do you consider your biggest success?
The film's not even out yet, but it doesn't actually need to be a success. My biggest success is the fact that I have been part of making it, because this wasn't my background. This isn't my education. It's not something that I've ever even been involved in beyond community project. So the fact that I've been able to sort of work with Jordan to the extent that I have, to write the story and to do the interviews, to get great stories out of these people, and then to write a documentary that we feel really happy with. It's flawed like anything. It's our first just us feature-length documentary, but it feels like a huge success to me that we've created it. And it feels like the most important thing I've done in my life.
Yeah. Well, and, in watching it, I was impressed.
Oh, good.
I have decades of experience in permaculture. I have 2 degrees from university here in the States that kind of revolve around this notion of sustainability. And the information that you were presenting in the first 20 minutes was spot on.
Great. That's good to hear.
Yeah. And the way it was being presented, it was presented professionally, consciously. You're not beating anybody over the head with it. It's a good listen. Definitely.
Good. It's nice to hear, because not a lot of people have seen it yet. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that link with me. And y'all are going to be able to see it too. All our listeners out there will be able to watch this.
Yep.
So what drives you?
Do you know, like going back to what I was saying earlier, it's a desire to feel that things are right in me, in my body, and in the world, and that everyone would feel that, like just to not feel that sense that things aren't quite right. Yeah. And I'm really driven by that. Like, what does it feel to feel right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
Well, it would be, and it's probably well known by your listeners, it would be Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was life-changing for me. It's a recipe book, but the first 100 pages were full of information that was completely new to me when I was looking to heal my body, and just absolutely blew my mind. It completely opened my mind, and it caused me to, to move back to New Zealand and get a job in a CSA and completely alter my path. Really, really important book to me. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she's a proponent of, but had a massive impact on me, and I really am grateful to her for that book.
Well, I love that. You're the first person that's mentioned that in 340 episodes, so...
Oh, yay!
Very good.
Yeah, I think it is a hugely influential book.
Yeah, that's Nourishing Traditions, correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Do you know, I think it's follow your heart. I talked before about being someone who follows my dreams and follows my passions. When I say follow your heart, I don't mean it just in the sense of seeking, personal happiness. I mean it in the sense of following what feels right in terms of how you feel in your body and how you feel in the world. And I think a lot of us have lost connection with that. We're so distracted by what the media and big industry and, well, basically society tells us is right. And it's finding that notion of what truly feels right. There's a beautiful quote at the very end of the film from Charles Eisenstein, where we end the film on this because we just thought it was so perfect. He says, trust what feels loving, trust what feels good, trust what feels aligned with who you really are. If you live by that and spread that vibe and other people start living by that, then the whole planet is going to change.
Wow.
So I just think that's so true.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Antoinette.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and it's lovely to be part of this huge thing that you've created, and I really congratulate you on everything you've done for the last 2 years. It's quite incredible.
Well, thank you. And it's the 2.5 years on the podcast, but 4 decades with the other stuff. So let's talk about the film. You mentioned that it's going to be released in 2 or 3 weeks. We're in the middle of February right now. So by the time the podcast launches on our channel, you'll be able to see this movie most likely. Where do they find it?
So the film becomes available for purchase on the 10th of March, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And it's available at www.livingthechangefilm.com.
Beautiful.
On that website, you can see the trailer and all of we've had requests from all over the world for people to host a screening. So we've got all of the information about how to do that.
Oh, great. And so livingthechangemovie.com is where we can find you at.
livingthechangefilm.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. You can find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/livingthechange, which includes a link to the movie. We are your urban farming resource. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Also visit urbanfarm.org to find articles, podcasts, webinars, courses, and more. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Claiming your inner urban farmer is easy. Grow food, share it, and name your farm. Then let the world know you're an urban farmer while supporting our podcast. Pick up your Urban Farmer bling, hats, and t-shirts at imanurbanfarmer.com. My intent with the Urban Farm Podcast is to educate and inform. So when I find a particularly good opportunity, I want to share it with everyone. The 2018 Food Revolution Summit is one of them. As you listen, you will be informed, inspired, and motivated to improve your health. You'll get cutting-edge insights and information from 24 of the top food and health experts in the world. Hosted by my friend Ocean Robbins, with interviews conducted by best-selling author John Robbins. This annual, week-long online event is free to attend. You will learn from experts you can trust about how to improve your health and reduce your risk of chronic disease. Sign up at urbanfarm.org/summit to join the revolution.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.